Welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week, The World This Week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. And with us this week is Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, Stefan de Vries of RTL4, John Rick MacArthur, usually in New York, publisher of Harper's Magazine and who happens to be in Paris this week. Thanks for being with us. And Harold Hyman of leading French 24-hour news channel BFM TV. Before the break, we were talking about this day trader. At first, it was thought perhaps the one who went on the BBC earlier in the week and said that he goes to bed at night dreaming of financial collapse. At first, it was thought it might be attributed to a group that calls itself the Yes Men, the group that's famous for once tricking the BBC into believing that one of their own was a spokesperson for Dow Chemical, ready to pay billions in compensation for the Bhopal chemical disaster. Wrong, says the group, which writes in The Guardian that sometimes truth outdoes satire. They picked up on his statement that Goldman Sachs rules the world. Duh, don't we all know that Goldman Sachs bet against the same housing market they were such a big player in and made $1 billion in profit when the subprime crisis rendered millions of Americans homeless. Now, earlier with France 24 digital mediator Eric Olander, we got your views in a Google Plus hangout on the matter. Take a listen.
I kind of got the sense, I mean, if he wasn't a spoof, if he was really talking legitimately, that he's saying the things that the real traders know about and maybe the real traders out there feel that they keep from the rest of us.
All right, and on Facebook, by the way, a couple of more comments. Dennis from Gary, Indiana, that this immorality is legal and encouraged and deemed success explains our decline. While Ed writes, the worse the better, Lenin's words put into practice by this twerp. Real conservatives care about fundamental stability. This guy is part of the problem. Harold Hyman, your reaction to that comment?
I don't understand Edward Newman. But anyway, my reaction was that I don't understand why there isn't this big reaction against capitalism as it is played out in the financial markets, because the financial markets are supposed to give us liquidity and economic flexibility and all this, and they've been living
and lend us money to do stuff
and actually be concentrated on lending us money to do stuff. And Goldman Sachs is supposed to advise clients to buy companies that are doing well and this sort of thing. And if you listen to the congressional hearings and all this, you slowly get the impression, no, you do get the certainty that already the Congress knows that that is poppycock, that they don't operate that way in Goldman Sachs. They're only aiming to increase their revenues for themselves, and that's not why they exist. And they have no regulation at all, regulation being totally normal for doctors, for journalists, for lawyers, for almost anybody, and not for them. So I'm waiting for somebody to have the nerve to say something without being eaten alive by the Tea Party.
Final point on this, Rick MacArthur, it's not just the Tea Party that's been speaking up. For more than 2 weeks, there have been daily demonstrations on Wall Street. Again, is this just a few hundred activists that we're seeing here, or is there something more to this?
Well, I think it's the leading edge of something maybe bigger. But the problem is that Obama is playing a double game. You know, he started out his administration pretending he was going to reform the financial system, and he keeps backing off every time he's confronted with opposition from the right, from the banking industry.
Did he even try?
I don't think he ever had the intention to do it, but he at least said he would. And he sapped. Now he's got as chief of staff an ex-J.P. Morgan man, William Daley, who also happens to be the brother of the former mayor of Chicago and a very powerful person in the Democratic Party. But Obama doesn't seem to be serious about financial reform. At the same time, he mouths platitudes all the time that suggest that he cares about it, and saps all the energy that was developing when Bush was in power, for real reform of the financial system and of the banks. But he's playing a double game very effectively up to this point. The other point to remember is that Goldman Sachs is still, I believe, I checked the figures a couple of days ago, Obama's leading bundler in terms of campaign contributions. They're sitting on all their employees saying, shell out, shell out, shell out for Obama, because after all, he hasn't been that tough on us. Why do you think they're contributing to him? They're relieved that there hasn't been more severe financial reform or regulation.
All right. We're going to get back to this point in the weeks to come, it seems, especially since the economy is so prevalent in that campaign for the U.S. president. We're going to move on, though, and tell you that last week at this time, we were broadcasting Mahmoud Abbas's historic speech before the United Nations, announcing a formal application for statehood. We listened to the Israeli Prime Minister, who offered to talk, and then came Tuesday's announcement by the Israeli government of 1,100 new homes to be built in East Jerusalem, to which the chief Palestinian negotiator, this announcement represents 1,100 no's to mediation efforts. And what's interesting is the context of this. A poll released on Wednesday, on the eve of the Jewish New Year, asked if Israel was a good place to live. 88% say yes. 2/3 of the respondents, though, say there's no chance ever of achieving peace with the Palestinians, and 45% say they fear for the survival of Israel as a Jewish state. Very mixed messages there, Stefan de Vries. The Israeli economy doing well,
Yes.
but it's not splendid isolation, is it?
Well, I was in Lebanon not a very long time ago, and the Lebanese economy is doing very well as well. Both countries didn't suffer at all from the crisis, which is really remarkable. And the thought I had when I was in Lebanon, I was in Jerusalem a couple of months earlier, I thought if these two countries just could get along well, then this would be the new Switzerland of the Mediterranean, would be an economic powerhouse that would even challenge Europe. And so it's very sad to see that it's not working this way. And this poll also, the 75% is really a lot of people who don't believe in peace with the Palestinians. And if I knew how they could get along, then I wouldn't be a journalist, but probably king of the world. It's a very sad problem, and every week we have different messages. Sometimes it looks like Israel is going to get towards the Palestinian Authority, and then the national politics in Israel are far more important, and they go to a far more extreme position. So it's I don't know what to think of this. I mean, it's going on for 50 years already, 1948, and they don't seem to get along well, and everyone is blaming each other. And
Harold, what I find amazing in that poll is the 45% who have serious existential doubts about the existence of Israel. Talk about doom and gloom.
Well, that's maybe typically Jewish. As a Jew, it's very Woody Allen to doubt your own existence.
But this looks like something like they really feel like it's like there is this existential threat.
That must be their most realistic trait, because they have one imaginary threat. Okay, it's Iran hurling bombs at them. I mean, if Iran did hurl some sort of atomic bomb, it would destroy Jerusalem and all the Palestinians with it. So it's kind of difficult to see that would really happen. But they do think about this, especially in the higher levels of the armed forces. The Iranian threat, and Iran doesn't even have one bomb. Israel has 300, between 80 and 300. No one really knows. Nuclear bombs, we're talking. So they're sort of worried about the thing not to worry about, which is Iran. I mean, not that Iran is nice, but... they don't trust the Palestinians, but they didn't give the Palestinians any chance, really. By encroaching in Jerusalem, you might as well just slap 25 Palestinians in the street every day when you go to work, and you're just about doing the same thing. So they've sort of compounded this terrible behavior with the Palestinians from a psychological point of view with this crazy fear of Iran, and this makes this mix that we're in danger of ceasing to exist, which is kind of hard to believe when you see how powerful they are. So I think they're deluding themselves.
We can see on that point the reaction of the United States. Last week we talked at length about what a tough position Barack Obama was in when he went to the UN, caught between the hopes he raised when he spoke in Cairo in 2009, that speech he gave to the Arab world, and the voters back home who support strongly the state of Israel. We can listen to the reaction of the U.S. Secretary of State on Wednesday, Hillary Clinton.
We believe that this morning's announcement by the government of Israel approving the construction of 11 housing units in East Jerusalem is counterproductive to our efforts to resume direct negotiations between the parties.
Counterproductive. Could she have gone further, or is she stuck in a bind?
Look, all of this is about domestic American politics. I went to and really intra-party politics in the Democratic Party. I went to the UN speech hoping to see Abbas, but I was late and saw Netanyahu instead.
Who spoke in English,
Who
not in
spoke in
Hebrew.
English, not in Hebrew. First of all, it's a tremendous advantage. But he spoke to the American people directly, as if he were a senator speaking on behalf of the 51st state of the United States. And he mixes everything up. Terrorism, Iran, Palestinians. It's terribly unethical what he does, but politically brilliant, because he touches on all the basic fears of Americans. Militant Islam, Iran, 9/11, et cetera, Al-Qaeda, and he mashes them all together in this very, very demagogic but very, very effective way. There is no way the Palestinians can evoke the kind of sympathy that he does. He also brilliantly said he'd run into a couple of Palestinians, people from the Palestinian Authority, who'd said, we won't have any Jews in our new state of Palestine. We, on the other hand, will continue to defend minority rights in Israel, the way we always have. And this sort of thing plays very, very well to the American street and to New York in particular. You can't beat it. But I'll just add one other thing, which I think is very important. The most important player in the Middle East, potentially in the Middle East peace process, that wasn't heard from is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, has no interest in seeing a Palestinian state established. It would probably be a very successful democracy, at least on the West Bank. The Palestinians have I was going to say laïc, excuse me, I can't. Secular infrastructure of professionals, very bourgeois, very well educated. The Saudis, if they wanted to, could pressure the United States into forcing Israel's hand and forcing some kind of resolution of the crisis. They don't want one. The only statement that the Saudi Arabians made during the entire General Assembly system was a statement on behalf of fighting non-communicable diseases. I'm not making this up. So you have this immense player, and I go back to Obama's double game. He says he wants to help Arabs find their voice and promote democracy and so on and so forth. What's he doing? On one of his first foreign trips in June of 2009, he goes to the throne room and with Rahm Emanuel, a son of Israel, and receives a gift from King Abdullah. What is that about? It's about telling the world, telling the Democratic Party, nothing's going to change. I'm for the status quo. I may say this about Arab nationalism or Arab rights or Arab aspirations, but things are going to stay the same.
All right, and one final point on this before we move on. We can see images from Cairo's Tahrir Square after Friday prayers, where Egyptian activists staged a protest rally demanding an end to emergency laws and a speedy transfer of power to civilians. Vivian Walt, you were in Cairo last week. You wrote on your blog about how the Camp David Accords are not being put into question, actually, right now.
No. I mean, certainly no Egyptian politicians, and I spoke to many from, the Muslim Brotherhood right through the spectrum, has any desire to tamper with the Camp David Accords for the simple reason that they can't afford a war. And they just simply can't afford to kind of stir up the pot. However, this whole issue around the Palestinian application for statehood in the UN, Obama's, utterly tepid response to this, and his assurance to Americans, here again, the domestic political agenda, that he would veto any application, has really infuriated Egyptians.
And suddenly made it an issue?
And made it an issue, whereas really, I was there through the entire revolution. You never saw an Israeli flag being burnt. It was not on the agenda, and it is really now on the agenda. And aside from that, the Egyptians simply are really befuddled by how stupid the Israelis are not to make a deal at this point.
All right, we'll see if that's an epiphenomenon or whether this is something that is going to last. One final point. Already in the past few months, their hearts seemed, well, how do we put it, no longer in it. We're talking about Kremlinologists, as they're called, quietly dropping the pretense of a rivalry between Russia's once and future president and his once and future prime minister. Last weekend, the party of Prime Minister Vladimir Putin putting the suspense to bed for good, announcing his plan to seek the top job next year. Now, Dmitry Medvedev will return to being the PM, and he'll go without a fight. He may be going quietly, but not his finance minister, with whom Medvedev engaged in a stunning live television spat during a presidential commission meeting on modernization. This was the scene on Monday in Dmitrievgrad.
If you think you have different views on the agenda than those of the president, well, there's just one thing to do, and you know what that is. Submit your resignation.
Dmitry Anatolovich, I indeed have differences with you, but I will take a decision in connection with your suggestion after I consult the Prime Minister.
You know what? You can consult anyone, including the Prime Minister. But while I'm the president, I take such decisions on my own.
All right, that's what Dmitry Medvedev said. This is, of course, this was going out live, but within 24 hours, another precinct had been heard from.
The duties of the minister will be performed by Anton Germanovich Siluanov. He is a good specialist, and his candidacy was obviously agreed with Dmitry Medvedev. This is our joint decision.
So, Stefan de Vries, who's the boss?
Sergio Corleone, the director of this.
Absolutely.
It's incredible, really. I mean, what are they thinking? And it's. I read an article last week. Maybe it was in Time magazine. I don't recall, but it was about Russian entrepreneurs who are deciding to leave Russia because they are stuck within the system. They can't earn any money. They can't grow bigger without paying any corruption. And I don't know where this country is going. It's very strange. I mean, it's in decline, and nobody seems to care, apart from some business people. But they're like clowns. I mean,
and yet, Vivian Walt, Vladimir Putin's genuinely popular.
He's immensely popular, and basically I think he's popular because, you know, Russia has been earning obviously billions in energy revenues in the last decade, and, you know, the price of oil and gas has rocketed, and so Russia has done pretty well. And, you know, it remains to be seen if the Russians would tolerate this kind of Putinocracy, whatever it's, you know, this one-man rule, if things reverse themselves. But I mean, it seems the absolute height of nerve, it's extraordinary, in the middle of, like, what is going on in the world, to turn around and say, well, you know, we're just going to own this country for the next 12 years.
All right, Vladimir Putin will be with us for a while. I want to thank you, Vivian Walt, for being with us. I want to thank Rick MacArthur, Stefan de Vries, and Harold Hyman. Thank you for being with us for The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for Business. That's hosted by Marcus Carlson.